Before we get started with today's show, I'm here to tell you about Brez Coffee Company, made by gamers for gamers right here on the Gulf Coast in Pensacola, Florida. Do you like light or medium roast? Then try the Necro Medium, Holy Grail Light, or Stamina Boost. Or if you're like me and prefer darker roast, try the Critical Dark or the Coup Slayer Mocha Roast. But what if you can't pick just one? Then try one of their specialty sample packs, perfect for an all-night gaming, or in the case of my fellow filmmakers, an all-night editing session. Forget about all the crappy coffee you've been buying at the grocery store and head on over to brezcoffeeco.com. Use the promo code DDE at checkout to get 10% off your order. Have you ever thought to yourself after listening to this podcast, why didn't Derek ask this question? Or why didn't he ask that question? I know I certainly have. Well, you get the chance to do that if you sign up for my Patreon at patreon.com/DDiamondPodcast. You get the chance to ask guests of the show a question. If you're a fan of the top 5 list, you get the chance to vote on what the topic will be. You also get early access to episodes, accessibility to my film scripts, and so much more. And you can do so by heading over to patreon.com/DDiamondPodcast. And we want to thank our patrons, Tim Spivey, Donna Diamond, and Shannon Williams. Thanks so much for your continued contributions, and now, on with the show. Welcome to the Derek Diamond Experience podcast, where every week I take a look inside the world of film and television with those who have lived it and experienced it. I am your host, Derek Diamond. And coming up on today's show, you'll be hearing my conversation with producer, writer, and director Joel Soisson. And this conversation was really fascinating because I don't get to talk with a lot of producers on the show, and Joel gives a fantastic explanation of what exactly a producer does in the film industry. And it was such a great learning experience. You know, he started in the mid-'80s, which is my favorite era of filmmaking. He's produced such films as Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and most notably, a movie you may know called Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. So it was really fascinating to get to hear his story on how he was involved with that, and also how he was hired to do a rewrite of The Lion King back in the 90s. And that story blew me away because I had no idea that that was even a thing. I had no idea that he did that. So really cool conversation. Hopefully you guys enjoy it as much as I had being a part of it. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Joel Soisson. Welcome back to the Derek Diamond Experience podcast, and this week it's my pleasure to welcome Joel Soisson to the show. Joel, how are you, sir?
I am doing great for the time being.
Fantastic. It's really all you can ask for, right?
In these times, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, I wanted to say, thank you for taking the time to chat with me here on the show. I was looking at your IMDb page before we started and was really kind of blown away with, the amount of work that you've done and some of the projects you've worked on in the industry, which I'm sure we'll get into some of those at some point. But I wanted to kind of start by getting a little bit of your backstory. Where are you originally from, and what was it that made you want to work in the film industry? Because as I'm sure you've heard, there's not really a set path to getting into film. Everybody has their unique journey of, maybe coming from another career. They knew they wanted to do it from, the first time they could form memories. So what drew you into the film industry?
Well, it's not as straight a path as a lot of people have taken. I wasn't one of these guys that was making epic features in my backyard as a kid with a Super 8 camera. I actually wanted to be a painter like my father. At some point in art school, I just decided that it was probably based on my talent and the marketplace in general, I was not going to be able to feed myself. So I then drifted more into the film arts, beginning with animation, then film. And, basically sort of forged my way from there. I'm not one of these people of my generation that had this sort of transformative moment. I found that there's a huge group of people who will tell you, and maybe you've heard them go, I decided to join the film community when I watched Star Wars for the first time. And that just made them into believers. Nothing like that for me. It was all sort of a slow crawl up to doing whatever I could. And that was more, my trajectory was like water, just finding its way, paths of least resistance kind of thing.
Right. Kind of speaking on, you said you went into animation before you went into film. With your background in art and originally that being what you wanted to do, was that kind of a natural transition for you?
It was pretty simple. I mean, going from painting to then 24 paintings in a second. And then the quick realization back in the day when people were hand drawing, that is pretty much close to sweatshop work. You just can blow your mind doing that kind of thing over and over and over again all day long. And my hat's off to those great, especially the Disney animators, which was the program I was going to go into. They're artists in their own right. And I just, some of my favorite films came out of that studio, but the making of it was just too difficult. The idea of 24 frames by clicking a button, much better. And I just instantly kind of gravitated toward that.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that because, I watch, current animation that has like that kind of like computer generated look, or even some of the more traditional looking animation, but still digital. And maybe it's because I grew up, in late 80s and into the 90s. So watching movies like Aladdin, like The Lion King, seeing that hand drawn style of animation, there's just like a certain charm to it. And I don't know if you feel the same way, but it's like you could feel the love and the time that went into those films.
Yeah, I have a special fondness for those kinds of movies. I love watching the new CG stuff, and that's great. But it's the same thing with effects in motion pictures, where the real stuff, when you're dealing with real cars and real bodies and real guts and real explosion, and just there's a visceral quality of it that I think we've lost. It's funny, The Lion King is one of my favorite animated films. I just think that was sort of the beginning of the end for drawn animation. But by then I had already moved on and was writing, and I was actually brought in to pitch a rewrite of the original Lion King script.
Really?
And yeah. And I read the script, and this has never happened to me as a writer before. I thought the script was perfect, because writers all want to step on everybody's work, and they all got a better idea than the next guy, and they think they're so like cool and great, and they've got the juice. And I was going to walk into that meeting and slay them with my ideas, and I basically sat there sweating, going, I got nothing I can offer to get the gig that would have defined my whole existence. And I just slunked out of that interview feeling like, okay, end of the road, my career is over. And fortunately it wasn't quite.
So how far into your career were you when that interview took place?
I would say that was early 90s. I can't even say
it was
for sure.
It was early to mid 90s.
Okay. Yeah. So I had pretty well established myself as a producer, a little less so as a writer. But it was certainly, it would have changed the trajectory of my career. I am a guy who has, as you've probably noticed on my IMDb page, quite a few horror films and genre films and sort of teen action comedies and that sort of thing. And I could have very well pictured myself doing more, studio-based animation writing, a lot easier than drawing, and more adventures and more kind of personal stories of the nature that I finally wound up getting to do this far into my career with, like my latest film. But it took me a long time to get there, and not to disparage horror films in any way, but they are much more mechanical as a process than the sort of the art of storytelling, which kind of excites me.
Right. You had mentioned you getting into animation and then into film. Once you made the transition to film, you also mentioned you were a writer and a producer. Which one of those avenues did you go through first?
I found producing the easiest to do because I worked for a producer, and basically the job just winds up on your lap, whether you want it or not. Basically, what producers are there to do is solve problems. So if there's a problem nobody else is able or willing to solve, they call you in to fix things. And I guess I was a pretty good fixer because I'd worked on a lot of different roles in films and kind of knew people's problems, and had both some technical and some creative solutions for just about anything that came up. But the problem with producing, I've learned over the years, is that it is exactly that. It is a repository for problems and pain. People that just need help with something, whether they're stuck in an airport because they couldn't get a ticket from the production, or whether the building collapsed, your set collapsed that you were going to shoot the next day, and you've got to rebuild it and you have nothing to shoot. I mean, it's only problems. Whereas the director can just sit back and go, I want this, I want that. And the writer can write these things. I want the Taj Mahal to float away on a flash flood. It's the producer's got to figure out how all that stuff gets done, and it's just painful at times.
But I also, and kind of dabbling more into the business side of film, like I've been doing the last few weeks on the show, it's really almost like an unsung hero type of job, because when people think of film, they automatically think of, the actors that you see on screen, or in some cases you have your directors like your Spielberg, your George Lucas, your John Carpenter.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really hear about producing and what goes on, I want to say on a different level, but almost like a behind the scenes type of job that you don't really have a full understanding of what you have to go through in order to make what you see on screen happen. So I have nothing but respect for, producers and those who, in a sense, do the grunt work for how films get made.
That's a very good question / statement, because I have a lot of respect for producers who do it better than me, that just dig into every problem and don't wait for it to happen, and are playing three-dimensional chess the whole time they're making a movie. There's more than two kinds of producers, but to speak broadly, because my mother never, for the entire time she was alive, had no real idea what I did as a producer, and I couldn't explain it to her because I could barely explain it to myself. But there are those producers who I want to be, and really have never gotten there yet, but they're the ones they call the dogs with the script tied to their collar, which they don't have to do anything. It's just they've got a property, and they can sit in a fancy restaurant and over lattes discuss whether they want Tom Hanks or Christian Bale, and then dial up the physical producer, the guy who's got to make all that happen, or woman, and wash their hands and go, okay, I'm going to take my check and go come up with some new movie, and good luck. I'll see it at the screening. And then there's all sorts of other producers who just get credit because they're friends of the actor, or they put a couple bucks in. I actually looked at IMDb for a guy that I wanted to hire on as a producer on this film I'm doing actually later this month. And I kid you not, on the IMDb page under producer, there were 99 credits for this movie, 99 producers. And I was just like, I actually worked on one where there were 20, and I thought that was the most absurd travesty that I'd ever participated in. And here's one that's almost 100. And what does that do to cheapen a role that used to be like, the great David O. Selznick kind of names of the past are now watered down to a guy on Indiegogo or whatever it is that chipped in $125 and got a credit.
It's not like the badge of honor, almost like you're referring to, that a producer should have.
No, it's unfortunately, it's just the currency is so devalued now that it's like paper. And it's sad because really good producers, and I don't necessarily count myself among them, but the really good ones deserve the credit that should be accorded to a superstar.
And I think, as far as you mentioning, like Indiegogo or, whatever crowdfunding they use, I feel like there should be maybe a different title for that.
There need to be guardrails put up on that role. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what that title would be, but I definitely think they should get credit because they financially contribute to the project. But as you mentioned, for it to be something in the same vein of, one of the hardest jobs in the industry, I think should be well separated.
After this is over, you and me will come up with a title.
We should. We should, and then copyright it.
And copyright it. Yes, yes, exactly. Now you're talking.
Yeah,
that's
there
where
we
the
go.
money is.
There we go.
We get a nickel for every time that credit is accorded anywhere on any movie, any place. Yes.
Oh, that's hilarious. I love that idea.
Stand by, world.
Yep, absolutely. So there is one specific film that I would like to ask you about. You were a producer on Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, mm-hmm. which was one of the great cult hits of the late 80s. And most recently, the new film came out, Bill and Ted Face the Music. How was your time working on that film? And did you expect it to be the cult hit that it is now?
No, we made that film, and the studio that financed it was so, let's say, unimpressed with the film that they didn't even bother to test it. They just, like on a fire sale, they fobbed it off to some very small little upstart company that took it upon themselves to actually put it in front of a real audience, and surprisingly liked it. And that was one of those lessons that you learn in movie making and in life, is that if you believed in something once, then be careful to abandon that belief with, shoddy evidence. The only screening we ever had at the parent company was a bunch of guys who are my age now, who had no connection to youth culture whatsoever or the humor of the time, and didn't even smile throughout the entire movie. And you know as well as anybody, you're sitting next to somebody in a dark theater, and if they're laughing and crying and leaning into the film, then you're liking it too, usually. But if they're just like, this is a piece of crap, and then they're just like fidgeting and looking at their phone and whatever, the movie just dies. It's the same movie, but it's suddenly a piece of crap. And that's how it played that first time. And to see it resurrected because somebody, not me, had a belief, a faith in the film that I had lost, allowed it to become what it was, which was something of a cult hit, I think.
Yeah, and it's crazy because, first of all, I wanted to mention what you said about someone sitting next to you in a theater and how they react to it, and it's almost an infectious behavior. That's extremely accurate, and that's something that I think I missed the most about seeing movies in theaters, before COVID hit, was that you'd go to watch, say, like Avengers Endgame or some hit comedy, when everyone else around you is just laughing and are in tears, that puts you in that same mindset and you start doing the same thing, and it just draws you more into the movie. It's like that audience feedback just pulls you in even more, and I think can either evaluate or devaluate your thought of the movie, or
Yeah.
elevate, I should say. But
Yeah. And yeah, we miss that opportunity now to have the communal reaction to a movie. I mean, theaters are still out there. Let's not
right,
sing their death knell, but it's definitely drastically changed, and even more so post-COVID.
for sure. How did the COVID pandemic affect your career? And were you working on a project when the pandemic hit and things started to shut down?
Actually, I had just finished something that a little TV movie that I had directed and written. So when the shutdown hit, it was one of those blessings in disguise for me. And I feel all the hurt and suffering that my friends and family and the people around the world are still going through. But for me, I have to admit specifically, that shutdown was a kind of a break that I needed and really kind of cherished. I sat at home, I wrote stuff that mattered to me. And I stared out the window at the shorebirds and took in life a little bit, which is, any of these career hamster wheels that we climb onto and start spinning so fast that we forget that there's like something to look at out there and react to. And so absent people and absent travel and absent work, I just had that kind of somewhat zen year of 2020. And now that everything's cranking back up again, and I've got two things waiting to go and one that's shooting in a week and a half, I'm kind of energized. For how long, I don't know. But yeah, so I almost needed it.
Yeah, and I think what I've been telling people about the pandemic is that I don't discount or downplay all the tragic events that have happened, like discounting all the lives that have been lost and businesses shutting down and people have lost so much. But there have been some positive things that have come out of it. And as you mentioned, it gave you that time to kind of recharge your batteries and do more writing and, become, and now you're excited about the projects that you're working on now. And it was, the same thing with me. It gave me a chance to kind of evaluate where I am as far as my mental health goes, burnout and everything like that. So it's been an interesting time for sure. But I think it's one of those things that, you take the good with the bad and you try and take something good or take the best out of whatever situation you're in.
I agree. Bit of a silver lining, if you want to call it that we got to be a little bit more tuned into our own world, and also in my case, reconnecting with friends that I hadn't really felt I had the time for, and realized how stupid that was.
Right. And it kind of makes you realize, what's truly important in your life as well.
Exactly. So, but no more of it. Let's end this thing sooner or later.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully we can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
But talk to me about, because you've been mentioning a couple of times that you do have a couple of projects that you're currently working on, one that's shooting very soon. Is there anything that you'd like to discuss with those?
Well, it's kind of, we do things in this industry, I guess I do, in sort of waves. I mean, I did some original stuff and then found myself doing loads and loads of sequels. And I've very deliberately gone back to trying to do more original stuff now, because sequels are fun in their own right, but they are sort of, you're handed the tray with all the food on it and the utensils, and all you get to do is sort of move things around to a certain extent. So the latest thing is kind of not sequels, but I've got two films that are based on old classics. The one that's coming up this month that we're shooting in Oklahoma, which is not a smart move given the COVID of it all, but who knew it was going to be that bad when we started prepping. But anyway, it's a remake. It's inspired by The Magnificent Seven, if you remember that film.
Oh, cool.
Which in its own right harkens back to The Seven Samurai, the great Japanese classic.
Yeah.
And then later on, we're going to be filming an adaptation of The Treasure of the Sierra Madre in South Africa, in a sort of modern, contemporized, post-COVID South Africa, which would be kind of fun to try.
For sure. No, both of those sound really cool. Magnificent Seven is to me one of the more iconic films that have ever been made. So I think to do something that's kind of inspired by that sounds really exciting.
Well, they run off and they round up Danny Trejo instead of Yul Brynner to be sort of this like badass kind of quasi machete-ish guy running around, getting together his old cronies,
That's great,
to do some good in the world.
No, that's
and it's
awesome.
more comedic than horrific, but I'm looking forward to that one. And yeah, spent a lot of time on this current one, just as I'm sure you know so well, the whole indie world is such a jungle, and to be able to get a movie out there and get it onto so many platforms as we're doing with this current one, it's a challenge, and it's difficult. And we've been lucky to get a boost from some really good associates and distributors and reviewers and stuff like that. But when I started in around 1985, there were 50 independent feature films made in the US. Did you know that?
I did not.
Now there's 20,000. Nobody has a real accurate count because it's almost impossible, but that's the estimate. So to go from that extreme to this extreme has been just mind-numbing for a guy like me.
Well, I think also with the invention of YouTube, Vimeo, and giving people so many other avenues to display their work, and plus the fact that you in theory you can make a film with your iPhone, because the camera quality is great. All you need is a decent microphone, some actors, and you can make things happen. And that's kind of what I tell people, is that if you want to make something or you want to get into film, you can start by doing that and really kind of teaching yourself how to make film. So I think with the addition of technology and new platforms, I think has really made the indie world kind of explode. And I know it's something that I've been learning more about, in the last couple of years, since I switched my focus of this podcast to focus solely on film and TV. I've really been exposed to more indie work and getting to interview different directors, actors that have been a part of that world has been really eye-opening.
Well, that's yes, I think you've characterized it beautifully. It's really a new world now where access to the process is not governed by who has the toys and the money. It's very much, I think, like at the turn of the century or the last century, when everybody aspired to be a writer, but once you could afford to buy a typewriter, then the playing field was level. Everybody had a typewriter if they wanted one. And the marketplace now was governed by the idea, not the access. And so you can make a feature film on your iPhone, and it very likely will be crappy because it came too easy to you and you're just like messing around. But if you have a great idea and you manage to come up with the very small amount of money now it takes to make a film, a feature, and your idea is great, it will get seen, and it will start things for you. And ideas are king again. And I love that competition. I'd much rather compete in the arena of creativity than in access. who's got the richest uncle,
Right.
you know. So good on the industry for that. It's going to be harder for a lot of people to be heard when there's, you know, tens of thousands of people doing the same thing, but you at least have that chance that you never had before.
Right. No, I couldn't have said it better myself. But as we start to wrap up here, I always like to end the conversations with this. Uh, what a piece of advice could you give? Normally, I say to an aspiring filmmaker, but in your case, because you've been a producer for so many years and you've worked on so many different projects, what advice could you give to someone who's aspiring to be a producer?
The best advice there's two things really. One is to try to get a job of any sort on a movie, whether it's as my ex-producing partner started off working at the craft service table, which is the snack bar on a movie set, where you're just making coffee and snacks. And it seems like a thankless, dead-end job, but you meet everybody at the craft service table, the actors, the producers, the director, everybody, and you talk to them and you learn from them and you watch what's going on around you. And every job on a set is valid. And so that's one thing. And the other thing that I've always done is anything that needed to get done, I would say yes to, no matter how menial that job was. And I only stopped saying yes to everything about 10 years ago when I became too exhausted to do everything that was asked of me. But that's just being around somebody who needs something will get you noticed if you're willing to do that thing. And it just, producing is just a collection of skills. It's not like writing where you're either good or you're not, or a director where you're either good or you're not. If you're a producer, you're just getting a little good at this and a little good at that, and you're just watching and absorbing. And pretty soon you're the guy who has an answer for every question. And that to me is what a good producer is he just knows what you need and how to fulfill that need.
I think that's great advice. Do you have any website or social media you'd like to plug so the listeners can follow you?
Yeah, I really do. The just simply because in all of the films that I've done, and you'll notice if you happen to wander like you did across my IMDb page, I've done probably 70 features or something at this point. But the one I am truly the most proud of having done is the one that I just finished, called My Best Worst Adventure. And that one, you can see if you just Google My Best Worst Adventure. We're on Facebook at My Best Worst Adventure, and Twitter at My Best Worst ADV. For some reason, they, I guess, couldn't afford the extra letters. And then I'm at Joel Soisson, SOISSON, on Twitter. And that's about as far as into social media as this old guy has managed to wade so far. But yeah, that's pretty much the whole of what I've been doing, except for 2020, where I sat on my ass for 12 months.
But you were productive in doing so.
Productive, yes, in a very quiet way.
Yeah, but that's the important thing. But exactly. Joel, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. This was a great chat.
Absolutely. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks again to Joel Soisson for that amazing conversation. Be sure to follow him at Joel Soisson on Twitter to find out what he'll be up to next. For next week's show, it's Halloween week, and it's also the return of the top 5 list, and I'll be discussing my top 5 horror movie villains. And after just watching Halloween Kills and other movies that I've been watching throughout the month, I'm ready to do this list. It's going to be a fun conversation, and you can join me on Facebook Live this upcoming Monday at 6 p.m. Central Time. I'll be discussing top 5 horror movie villains, other Halloween-related movies, whatever we want to talk about. That's what I love about the live shows. You guys dictate the conversation. Whatever you guys want me to talk about, I'll talk about. So be sure to follow me on social media. I'll post some links there. to be able to watch the show. You can follow me on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at DDiamondPodcast. If you want to subscribe to the show, I'm on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcast for free. Just search for The Derek Diamond Experience. And if you could, please leave a review. The more reviews I get, the more visible I become to the podcasting public. You can also find me on Patreon at patreon.com/DDiamondPodcast. If you want to watch the video versions of the show, I'm on YouTube. Just search for Derek Diamond. You can find all the episodes there. And of course, thank you to my friends, the Unicorn Wranglers, for providing the theme music for the podcast. You can check out all their music on Apple Music, Google Play, and Spotify. That's going to do it for this week's show, so enjoy the rest of your week. Have a safe and fun weekend. Thank you for tuning in to another awesome episode of the Derek Diamond Experience. I am your host, Derek Diamond, and we'll see you guys back here next Thursday.